Hey, what's up, Masters? Welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery podcast. And today we have John Miles with us. What's going on, John?
Hey, thank you so much for having me today. I can't wait to have this discussion and to be of service to your audience.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming here today and spending some time with us. You have a new book coming out in February called Passion Struck. And you also have a podcast, 3.5 million downloads a month. Like, wow, that's impressive.
Thank you. Never in a million years thought it would become what it's become, but it all started because I had written the initial outline for the book and I was talking to various agents, and probably like a lot of the listeners on this podcast, I had come out of the corporate world and didn't really have that huge of a personal brand. And so these agents were asking me, how do you even know the concepts are going to resonate? And at the time when I was doing this, it was still COVID. And obviously, there's no way you could do keynote speeches on it. So I just decided that the best way to test it out would be on a podcast. And that way I would see what's resonating and what's not and adjust accordingly. And it's fortunately resonated more than I ever thought it would.
Yeah, good for you. And I think based on probably the times and during COVID and everything else, I think you just hit a topic that is important to a lot of people, right? I think a lot of people are kind of I hate to say a funk, but a lot of people have been in a funk for a while, and especially now with everything going on. So let me tell people who you are, and then I want to talk about the book and what the title means and everything else. But this is from your website. It says, "Are you living a life that sets your soul on fire? Are you merely existing, moving through each day like a ship without a sail? The truth is, we all have our challenges, the invisible barriers that confine us and block our path to greatness. But what if you could leap those hurdles, break free from self doubt, and tap into that reservoir of self belief that anything is possible? Imagine a life where you connect with your true self, igniting a spark within that transforms life from mere existence into an exhilarating journey filled with purpose, passion, and untapped possibilities." This is the essence of Passion Struck. And as I was telling you earlier, I get a lot of agencies that reach out to me, John, and then always, hey, I got a guest for you. And a lot of them I don't even look at, but what caught my attention was when you talked about overcoming. Well, they talked about overcoming self doubt as well as the passion and the limit, the belief that anything's possible. That's really what caught my attention. So again, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, I'm ecstatic to get to talk to you
So
about it all.
let's talk about the book. Let's talk about, well, first off, it's called Passion Struck.
Right
Talk to us about that.
here's a picture of it right
Awesome.
there.
And book will be in published in February, so people can actually get a copy of it. But right now they can pre-purchase it.
They can pre-purchase it right now, and if they go to the website, I've got some fantastic bonuses that they will get, including I have a section in the book that starts detailing something I like to call deliberate action. And I have a six-step process that I've used for over 20 years, personally and professionally. And I have a 50-page ebook that details how to utilize that. And for the salespeople out there, I also have a great ebook that's all about how to use intrinsic motivation to increase profitability of your company or of your division, whatever it may be.
Amazing. So I'm going to start right here. Tell us about the title of your book, Passion Struck. What does that mean for our listeners?
So this goes back a few years. I was having a conversation with a mentor and a long-term friend of mine, Keith Crotch. The audience may or may not know Keith. He used to be the CEO of DocuSign, a company I'm sure many people know, and chairman. But then he went on to become the Assistant Secretary of State uh, most recently, and he was really working on economic causes. But I was talking to him when he was at DocuSign, and I had started thinking myself about people like Keith or people that we see around us. I know, Gary Keller, so we'll give him as an example. But we see these forces of nature who are just so compelled by the vision that they have of trying to solve a unique problem that they're willing to risk it all to go after it. And they have just this innate passion and intentional willpower that is driving them to conquer challenges, overcome adversity, whatever it may be. And as we started to unpack kind of the concepts, Keith says to me, well, man, that sounds like you're talking about someone who's been stuck and they go to becoming passion struck. And that word just kind of hit me. And after we got off the phone, I started thinking about it and I did as anyone would. I went to GoDaddy thinking there's no way on earth
Mm.
passion struck is available. And there it was. And so that really lit a lightning rod in me. And it's been this catalyst that I've surrounded the whole brand around.
All right. That, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And when you talk about, you talk, about people reaching those levels, and how important is it that, I mean, is your philosophy that you have to have passion for something in order to achieve the highest levels? I mean, obviously I haven't read your book yet, but talk to us about that. How important is it? Is that the premise of your podcast and your book?
The premise is I started to look at initially 20 to 30 individuals, which I would call high achievers. And then I started to expand that. So over a period of 7 years, I examined well over 500 different individuals, really across any area that you could think of: academia, astronauts, athletes. And I started to look at what are these common principles that I found that the vast majority of them are using. And by doing that research, I came up with 12 principles that I found guided them on this path to becoming passion struck. And those are the 12 principles that I detail in the book. Six of them I organize around mindset shifts that they make, and six I organize around behavior shifts that they make. And then all of this is fundamentally powered by what I call the psychology of deliberate action.
Mm. So can you share a couple of those with us? Let's say you share like say two around mindset and then two around behavior.
Sure. So I'll just start with the first one. The first one I call the mission angler. And the way I write these chapters is I go through kind of a concept that is either rooted in positive psychology or behavior science. And in the chapter Mission Angler, I talk about life crafting, and I use an interview I did with Hal Hirschfield, who's a behavioral scientist at UCLA's Anderson School of Business. And life crafting is really an active process where you reflect on the present and the future, setting goals in crucial areas of your life, and you really look at, if this is what I want to achieve in the future, how do I craft a life to achieve it? And so in this chapter, I go through the example of Jim McKelvey, who the audience may or may not know. They probably know his more famous co founder of Square, Jack Dorsey, but Jack and Jim McKelvey founded Square together, and Jim has now become a serial founder of various companies. But I really go through that. Jim's advice is really about you needing to find a problem in life that only you can uniquely solve, that's worth solving, and you can craft your life around making that your main purpose. So that's what that chapter is really about. And I end it with a series of different exercises that a person can do to go through this in their own life. Another chapter from that section is on, I call it the perspective harnesser. So this is really around how do you adopt new viewpoints to broaden your horizon through diverse perspectives. And this chapter really goes into the topic of paradoxical thinking or both and thinking. And I started off by highlighting the work of Marianne Lewis and Wendy Smith, who are two leading behavior scientists around both and thinking. But then I dive deep into the story of a personal friend of mine, retired Navy SEAL and astronaut Chris Cassidy. And we explore how both during times at combat when he was a SEAL, and then when he was either on the space shuttle or on the ISS, how he utilized this essence of how you can shift your perspective to alter how you're approaching your life. So those would be two of the mindset specific
Mm.
chapters. And then in the part two of the book, where I go into cultivating intentional behaviors, one of the chapters I go into is something that I call the anxiety optimizer. And this is how do you transfer your nervous energy or your stress into productive fuel. And in this chapter, I focus on the work of Stephen Kotler, who's a New York Times bestselling author of The Art of Impossible. And he really talks about something that he calls the peak performance equation, which is really the flow state that you can put yourself in. And then I tell the story in this chapter of Navy SEAL Mark Devine and NASCAR driver Jesse Uigi. And Mark Devine finished the honor man in his SEAL Buds class, and he was the first one where his entire boat crew, out of all the SEAL classes before that, Buds classes before that, he was the first one where everyone graduated. And he did this because he was able to teach the other folks who were around him how to use breath control, positive internal dialogue, imagery, and targeted focus so that they could transport themselves out of the hardships that they were facing and to understand how to utilize the stress that they were facing to their advantage to optimize their situations. So that
Mm.
chapter really delves into that. And then another one that I'll just mention is a chapter that I wrote on a concept I call the gardener leader. So this is how do you lead with intention? Because I feel that topics like the servant leader and other leadership styles have been out there for a while, and I feel in the world we're in today, we need a new model of leadership. So the whole concept here is you need to lead like a gardener nurtures a garden. So eyes on, but hands off. And I used Keith Crotch, who I brought up earlier in the conversation, along with both of our mutual friend, General McChrystal, uh, to discuss this chapter. And I outlined five major principles in it. One is to delegate to the right level. Another one is to effectively hire for your weakness. The third is to become a ambitious leader. The fourth principle is putting the team first at all cost. And the fifth principle is to inspire your colleagues through a noble mission. So those are just two examples of the behavior shifts and then two other examples of the mindset shifts.
Thanks for sharing those. Yeah, and I took some notes on that. And you, let, let me ask you this question. It's funny. This kind of, I think a lot of people are stuck. And I think the book, Passion Stuck, right? Could be a book title as well, right? How does people like get, like, when you're working with people, do a lot of people come to you and they're kind of clear, like, hey, this is where I want to go, but I don't know exactly how to get there? Or do you have, or I'm guessing there's a combination of both. You got people that aren't even clear where they want to go, but how do you help people get unstuck?
So the first major starting point is to figure out what is causing them to be stuck in the first place. And I think we are best positioned to serve the person we once were. And so what I found when I found myself stuck in my own life, it was at a moment that people might be able to relate to. Uh, they might not, but for me, I at the time was in the dream position I thought I had always wanted. I was the CIO of a Fortune 50 company, making multiple seven figures a year, having reached this pinnacle that I had constructed my life to that point to achieve. But I was filled at that point with all kinds of self doubt, primarily because I felt I had reached this point where I was putting on what I say is a mask. I call it a mask of pretense, where I was going into work, but behaving in a way that wasn't truly me. You know, as an individual, I'm an introvert. As a senior executive in a Fortune 50 company, most of the time you're having to act like an extrovert. But more so than that, I found that I had built this career up around the things that society tells us that we need to do. And so I became maniacally focused on achieving success, on reaching the next aspiration that I wanted to reach to as quickly as I possibly could, of building this life I wanted, which was all oriented towards the external motivated things in life. And what I really figured out at that point was that the intrinsic things that really bring us happiness were really missing in my life. And I really doubted myself because I realized that the path that I was pursuing was not the path that I should be on. And so it became this really wide gap of how do I get from where I am now to where my heart feels it's calling. And that is not an easy step to make, especially when you've built this life where you have now all these possessions and a family that's dependent on you and other things. So for me, I was stuck in this mess of living a life that wasn't authentically mine. I didn't feel passionate about what I was doing. I felt numb inside. I was exhausted. I was burnt out. And I felt like I was just going into work every day faking it because I felt stuck because I
Mhm.
had to provide.
How common is that right now, John? That people feeling like that, just not passionate about what they're doing, numb inside, just kind of going through the routine.
I think it is pervasive. And we use different words to convey its messaging. So there's epidemics right now of loneliness, of hopelessness, of helplessness that people globally are facing. And those numbers are in the hundreds of millions, if not billions. I mean, there's some countries, such as Brazil, where 55% of the population feels lonely more of the time than not. What I think all of this fundamentally comes down to is a feeling of we don't hold significance, or as I like to say, antimattering or unmattering, that our lives don't matter, that we don't know why we're getting up every day, putting our clothes on. Uh, and I think a ton of people right now are facing that. And the economic, the social economic divides between us, the wars, everything else, I think are just adding fuel to this fire.
Yeah, yeah, I think I agree with you, man. I think that that's why I asked you the question. I talk to people all the time, and it's interesting listening to you as well. You think about somebody that's at the level you were, like you said, in the job you wanted, making multiple seven figures, and yet you're just not happy. And you can think about the person on the other end of the spectrum feeling the exact same way, right? So it's not about the possessions, it's not about the money, right? It's what is it about?
It's about having something intrinsically that brings you joy, that ignites a fire inside of you to do something that helps what I feel is society as a whole. I think we are the most satisfied the most content, the most happy during those times when we're doing things to help other people.
Mm.
And also doing something that uniquely is honed in on our innate gifts that only we can bring to the world. And I firmly believe that each one of us has been brought here for a certain mission that only we have the power to fulfill. And it's about trying to find that mission that you're supposed to fulfill that I think leads you down this path of becoming passion struck and living this meaningful life that I would say most people want to aspire to live.
Do you do you know, like, do you, like, if someone came to you and said, John, I want to figure out what's my mission, what's my passion, um what would you say to them?
I would start off by asking them when is the last time that they truly spent time with themselves. And I don't mean an hour here, an hour there. I mean doing work daily for an extensive period of time, understanding who they really are. Because I think so many of us we let all the distractions of the world take hold. I like to say we act as if we're the pinball in the game of pinball and we're just bouncing off of everything instead of being intentional in our focus and playing the game instead of it playing us. And I think that's how so many of us are living our lives. We make the choices that we do on a daily basis as if we're on autopilot. You know, we commute the same way. We go to the same gas station. We go to the same grocery store. We go to the gym. But how often are we intentional about the most important choices that we're making that ultimately culminate into the life we want or the life that we're living? And so I think the first starting point is to really do a self audit of yourself, which is really what that whole mosquito. I have a chapter called the mosquito audit is all about, and that is really auditing all aspects of your life to understand who are the people, what are the activities you're doing, what are the hidden influences that are impacting your ability to express your passion. Because until you let all of that stuff out, it's going to be very difficult for you to let yourself in and to truly understand where your goals are and what it is you want to be passionate about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I know you talk about self doubt as well. Do you feel like the self doubt comes from the lack of, I guess, fulfillment, or is it something else, or
I
both?
think our self doubt comes from a lack of feeling that we're worthy,
Mm.
which manifests itself in a way that we don't feel self love. And a lot of our worthiness is tied to our upbringing. It's those things that happen to us during our childhood, uh, especially if you experience big trauma in any way during those fundamental years. And it could happen then or it could happen later. But I think so many of us hold on to those negative aspects of our lives and they build up as we suffer in silence. And it affects our worthiness, it affects how we act out in the world. I think that's what leads so many people to become, whether you call it an alcoholic or a workaholic or a drug user or a sexaholic, whatever it may be, we take steps to outwardly try to hide the pain that we're feeling inside because ultimately we don't love ourselves. And until we can start showing ourselves kindness, you're not going to be able to show the world around you kindness.
Mm. That's super important. What would you say? It ironically, I come from a really, me personally, comes from a really broken childhood. I was actually talking about this yesterday, and it took me a long time, John, to kind of realize that that wasn't, that's like, I think a lot of us I carried it with me for a long, long time. I'm 53 years old. I probably in the last couple of years really started to become more aware of it and how it was affecting me and affecting my outcomes in a lot of ways. And I realized it wasn't done to me, but it was actually done for me, because now, because of everything I went through, I'm a tremendous father. I'm a tremendous husband, right? I understand right and wrong, and I just look at the compare myself to my father. And I wish I would have got that 10 years earlier, or 15 years earlier, 20 years earlier, but I didn't. What would you how does somebody kind of come in touch with that earlier in their life, that maybe went through those traumas and those challenges from their childhood?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is face yourself and say that you have a problem.
Mm,
And I think oftentimes once you do that, then the next step is to seek someone else out who you could talk to about it. I mean, that could be a friend or a partner, or it might need to be a therapist. I know for me, what ended up helping the most was going through cognitive processing therapy and EMDR and those things, because some of this trauma was so deep rooted, at least for me, that I really had to get through those stuck points and realize at the end of the day that these things that happened to me that I was blaming myself for were not my fault.
mm,
And if there's any advice I could give my younger self, it would have been to deal with some of these stuck points much earlier in my life rather than continuing to suppress them, pretending like someone else wouldn't understand or that I was strong enough that I could navigate those hardships on my own without getting the help that I needed. And so I think it starts with admitting first that you have a problem. Sometimes it amounts to you reaching the bottom and realizing that you can only build yourself up by starting at that bottom and building yourself up brick by brick. But if you're fortunate enough, and you're younger, it would be to let go of this pride that you have and this ego
mm.
and let yourself be vulnerable and get the help that you need.
Yeah, it's funny, as you were speaking, I wrote down the word ego twice, and that's kind of what, because that was me 100%. Like, I can figure this out. I'm stronger than this. But really, there's that uncertainty, that deep rooted little bit of uncertainty, right? It's just like that little tiny bit makes a difference. And so listen, I'm going to get a copy of your book. I can't wait. For people that want to grab a copy, what's the best way to do that?
So it is on all the major bookstores that you go to online to buy a book. So you can get it on Amazon, you could get it on uh, Barnes and Noble, you could get it on Walmart.com. But if you would like access to these free gifts that I'm giving away, you can go to any one of those sources, come back to my website, put in your order number, and we'll send you an automated email where we'll give you uh, the first chapter of the book, a mini mastermind that I did on. You asked the question earlier, 5 ways that you can find your purpose. You can become part of the launch group on Facebook and then the 2 ebooks that I mentioned earlier on. The other thing you can do is on that book page, which is passionstruck.com/passionstruckbook, I have the Passion Struck quiz. And one of the things I go through in the book is 5 stages on your development to becoming passion struck. It starts with something I call a subsister, and it ends with a creative amplifier. And you can take the test. It'll take you about 10 minutes and it will tell you where you're at and the action steps that you need to take to reach the next level.
All right, I love that. We had about a dozen or so people on Clubhouse. If anybody has a question for John, raise your hand, and we probably got time for a question or so. If anybody has one, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll keep my eyes on you. Let as we're getting ready to wrap, I know one of the things that was mentioned, we send out a form for everybody that's going to be on the show, and ask if there's anything that you want to bring to our audience. What is it? In You wrote, share the journey of living intentionally and breaking free from the fears and limitations that hold us back from achieving our aspirations. So what do you want? What do you want to say about that, John, to our audience?
So there are probably many people in the audience who've read Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. And I'm
Yeah.
a big fan of it. And I was reading it a number of years ago, and the first chapters of it take place with her examining cadets from West Point. And by examining them and what led them to becoming officers in the Army, she goes down this path of realizing that it was passion and perseverance, which she describes make up grit. I ended up going to the Naval Academy, so I have some firsthand knowledge of this, and I do think that passion and perseverance definitely played a role in me getting through that. But I think that there's one very important missing ingredient, and that is you can have all the grit in the world that you want, but if you're not aligning it to the right areas, then where is that grit taking you?
Mm,
And so I found that this missing ingredient was our intentionality, because our intentions are really guided by our core values. They're guided by the wisdom that we have inside of us. And it's that intention that guides your grit to not only get over adversity, but to get over it in a way that leads you closer to the life that you want to live. And so it is really those three things married with the mindset shifts, behavior shifts, and then this intentional action taking that leads you closer to the aspirations that you want to achieve in life.
that makes a ton of sense. I know Jordan raised her hand. Jordan, you're welcome to come up if you want. I sent you an invitation. I want to go back to something that you said earlier that's kind of been on my mind. Is you mentioned, I wrote it down. Yeah, you said people need to realize, face themselves and realize that they have a problem. Um, what would you? I feel like there's a lot of people that, especially I coach and train and consult, and I feel like there's a lot of people that don't, either they don't realize they have a problem, or they don't think they have a problem. So I guess if somebody doesn't think they have a problem, do they really have a problem, or they just like what I guess how, yeah, that's kind of like, how does somebody know? Like, what do you say to somebody? Because like I can see certain people, like, yeah, bro, you have an issue. You don't get along with people. People are, you're polarizing, but they don't see it themselves. How do you help someone like that?
I think for most people, we are our worst self observers. I know that was the case for me. And I think the wake up call was me starting to realize um, how my actions were starting to break down relationships that were important to me. And so I think it's each of us comes to this realization on our own timetable. But I think some of us, when it hits us, it has more force depending on how long we've waited to get that message, if that makes
Mm,
sense. So I guarantee you that some of those people that you just mentioned, I can think of a few of them off the top of my head myself, are going to get this message. And when they do get it, it's going to hit them harder when they finally get it, because the ramifications are going to be much deeper, because they're going to find that there are certain important things in their life that are just absolutely missing. And they're going to start asking themselves why. So the greatest thing that we can do is to learn to be self aware, to learn to spend the time, however it may be, whether it's mindfulness practice, a walk, however you do it, to start unclouding these inner thoughts that hide the trueness of who we truly are, um, from ourselves oftentimes.
That's good. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'll tell you one of the things I do is I get up at 4:45 and I have those first couple hours of the day for myself, for reading, journaling, meditate, and I think that's a critical time for me, John. It's helped me it's practice I picked up 10 years ago, and it's I think it's helped me tremendously. So I do appreciate your time today. Is there anything that you else you wanted me to ask you that I didn't ask or didn't get to?
No, I mean, I do the same morning routine that you do, or my variation of it. I get up every day at 5 a.m. But there's some people who are night owls, and that 5 a.m. just doesn't work for them because they're on a different clock than you and I are on. So the important thing is to, whether you're front loading your day or back loading the day, the most important thing I think is to find some time. And I know we all have millions of things to do, um, but to find some time that is truly your time to do the things that you're passionate about, to do that internal learning that only setting aside purposeful time to do is going to amount to change. If you don't set aside that time, and it's so easy. I mean, I was there with everyone else raising two kids saying, I don't have time, but you just make the time.
Mm.
It's not, I'm sure when you started getting up at 4:45, at first, it probably wasn't the easiest thing for you
It's,
to do,
it's
but
still not the easiest thing, but you do it. Once you're up, right?
right. I mean, and that's,
Yeah.
as Robin Sharma likes to say in his famous 5 a.m. club stuff. I mean, that's once you're up, the next thing you need to do is then start taking actions to keep yourself going. So, I'm not sure about you, but I mean, within 5 minutes of getting up, I am exercising. So, I am outside walking my dog. And that walk for me serves as both exercise, but I take the headphone off. I do all that. And I just really, spend at least a half an hour just thinking about the day, thinking about what I'm grateful for, thinking about what I've got to do, what's important, and it really sets up the day. But you could easily do that to end your day as well.
Yeah, great point. I'm glad you said that because that is a really, really good point. So thank you for that. Two of the books you mentioned as well, Stephen Kotler, he's been on my podcast. And I can't think of the name of his book right now. I know it's up here somewhere. Phenomenal book.
Well,
What was the name of his book again?
well, he has.
The
I
Art
mean,
of
his most
Impossible. I think that's the one, right?
the art of
Yeah.
impossible. He's got one about Superman, and then his most recent one was Nar Country, where he taught himself how to park skate,
Got it. Got it. Got
which
it.
was really cool.
Yeah, yeah, phenomenal books. And then Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, another great book. So I just can't wait to get your book, man. I'm excited to get a copy of your book as soon as it comes out. So I appreciate that. Tell us one more time the best way to do that.
The best way to do that would be to either put in Passion Struck on Amazon, and it'll bring the book right up, or to go to my website, passionstruck.com, and you'll see right on the navigation, I've got a tab there for the book, and that'll give you more information on it. You can see who's endorsed it, and then sign up for the free gifts.
All right, perfect. And final question today. What would you based on everything we talked about today, I know I jumped around a little bit. What would you want people like if they just popped in now and started listening? What would you want them to walk away with from this podcast today? Besides getting a copy of your book.
I think no matter where we are in our lives, we all aspire to have meaning, to feel that we're waking up every day to have significance. And what my book is all about at the end of the day is teaching you how do you live a life of significance. And I outline some famous, some not so famous people in the book, but what I'm trying to show throughout it is the behavior science or the positive psychology science that shows why these actions you take are important. And then I try to show different examples through the people I lay out in the book to highlight how they have utilized these principles in their own life. And then I try to give you exercises at the end of each chapter where you can apply them in your own. And so I want it to really be a book that you don't just read, but more importantly, you live.
Mm.
Because to me, being passion struck isn't an end state. It's a constant state of wanting to feel this way because at the end of the day, it brings you significance, happiness, and contentment.
Amen to that. Yeah, I think gratitude is I'm not sure how much you do on gratitude and how important gratitude is to you, but critically important to me, and that's what I'm taking from listening to this today.
Yeah, I touch on it in the book. I've done a number of solo episodes on gratitude in the podcast. And for me, one of the most important things I do daily is a gratitude practice. And I think what people won't realize is once you start doing this, if you don't have a gratitude practice, I guarantee you, if you start doing it after a week or two every single day, you're going to start seeing changes in your life. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that hard. And it really doesn't have to be that hard. It could just start out with before you go to bed, think about 3 things that you're grateful for and do that every single day. And be whether it's the first thing you do in the morning or the last thing you do at night, it becomes the intention that you set and you're reminded of it because of the gratitude that you feel for what's impacted your day.
Well, I appreciate you joining the show, John. Thank you very much. It's been great getting to know a little bit about you as well as I'm looking forward to getting a copy of your book. So thank you again for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the audience who's been here as well.